Well, hello there, everybody. How are you doing today? What an exciting day. Let's see. Let me get some light on here. That's much better. We are back for another Bible story reading, and we are continuing with our story of Esther. If you are joining us for the first time, what we do here is we go through the different stories of the Bible. For people who don't know the stories, maybe you've only heard bits and pieces of them. Maybe you have forgotten them, or perhaps you've never heard them at all. So many of the stories in the Bible are things that are part of our culture today. Little sayings, little phrases, little things that we get actually come from the Bible. And a lot of people feel intimidated when other people start talking about Bible stories because they don't actually know what it says. So we go through these stories so that you have a chance to know what they say. We have been going through, just started, the book and story of Esther. If you remember in chapter 1 that we did yesterday, Queen Vashti had chosen not to show up for the king's banquet when she was summoned to come to his banquet. So because of that, he has now dethroned her. She has lost her position as queen, and the king is going to be looking for a new queen. And now we will begin with chapter 2. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you. We go live on Facebook at a page called Get Clear Teachings. You can search for us there. You can find our live videos along with some other teachings. But in the meantime, hit that like and subscribe button. We sure appreciate you. All right, let's get started right away with Esther chapter 2. Sometime later, when King Ahasuerus' rage had cooled down, he remembered Vashti, what he had done, and what was decided against her. The king's personal attendant suggested, "Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in each province of his kingdom, so that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem at the fortress of Susa. Put them under the supervision of Hegai, the king's eunuch keeper of the women, and give them the required beauty treatments. Then the young woman who pleases the king will become queen instead of Vashti." This suggestion pleased the king, and he did accordingly. In the fortress of Susa, there was a Jewish man named Mordechai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. He had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the other captivities when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took King Jeconiah of Judah into exile. Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah, that is, Esther. Because she had no father or mother, the young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good-looking. When her father and mother died, Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. When the king's command and edict became public knowledge, and when many young women were gathered at the fortress of Susa under Hegai's supervision, Esther was taken to the palace into the supervision of Hegai, keeper of the women. The young woman pleased him and gained his favor so that he accelerated the process of the beauty treatments and the special diet that she received. He assigned 7 hand-picked female servants to her from the palace and transferred her and her servants to the harem's best quarters. Esther did not reveal her ethnicity or her family background because Mordecai had ordered her not to make them known. Every day, Mordecai took a walk in front of the harem's courtyard to learn how Esther was doing and to see what was happening to her. During the year before each young woman's turn to go to King Ahasuerus, the harem regulation required her to receive beauty treatments with oil of myrrh for 6 months, and then with perfumes and cosmetics for another 6 months. When the young woman would go to the king, she was given whatever she requested to take with her from the harem to the palace. She would go in the evening and in the morning and would return to a second harem under the supervision of the king's eunuch, Shahashgaz, keeper of the concubines. She never went to the king again unless he desired her and summoned her by name. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordechai, who had adopted her as his own daughter. When her turn came to go to the king, she did not ask for anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, keeper of the women, suggested. Esther gained favor in the eyes of everyone who saw her. She was taken to the king in the palace in the 10th month, the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. She won more favor and approval from him than did any of the other virgins. He placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. The king held a great banquet for all his officials and staff. It was Esther's banquet. He freed his provinces from tax payments and gave gifts worthy of the king's bounty. When the virgins were gathered a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not revealed her family background or her ethnicity as Mordecai had directed. She obeyed Mordecai's orders as she always had while he raised her. During those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance, became infuriated and planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he reported it to Queen Esther, and she told the king on Mordecai's behalf. When the report was investigated and verified, both men were hanged in the gallows. This event was recorded in the historical record in the king's presence. We're going to stop there. That was chapter 2 of Esther. Remember, there are 3 ways that we look at these scriptures when we read them. What does it say? We have to have reading comprehension. You have to read it to know what it says. Second, what was it saying to the people of the time? You have to take everything into context, understand the culture and the history in which it was written. And last but not least, what, if anything, is this saying to us today? So what we just read is that the king has decided it's time for him to find a new queen. Vashti has been dethroned. She is no longer queen, and he is going in search of a new queen. So he sends out these orders for all of the beautiful women in the land, the beautiful virgins, to be brought together. And he will choose from them which one will become his queen. So if you can imagine a beauty pageant, these young women are all preparing themselves. It says for 6 months they had oils and perfumes put on them. This was a time for them to make themselves beautiful. It was like a year-long spa, if you will. So they required all of these beauty treatments. Now, we would not do some of the things today that those women did then for many reasons. First off, we know that some of those beauty treatments are not healthy for us. Our skin doesn't really respond well to it in our old age. And we also have running water. We have more modern access, if you will, to bathing than they did back then. So beauty regimens were completely different than they were today. So at the end of 6 months, then they started doing other things to look good. Mordecai had told Esther, do not let anybody know, do not reveal to the king your ethnicity. She was a child who had been born under captivity. Remember, the Hebrews, the Jewish people, many of them had been taken from Israel into Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. And then over time, Babylon had been taken over, Nebuchadnezzar's line had been taken over, and now there's this new king, and she is of the people that are living in this land that were exiled. She was of the Jewish ethnicity. And Mordecai had instructed her not to let anybody know that, because typically speaking, I have a hair stuck on my lip somewhere and I can't quite get it. Typically speaking, those people would have been kind of looked down on from the Persians and the Midians. So she didn't tell anybody. But we know from this story that she was quite beautiful and a pleasing person. Now the time comes for her to be taken to the king. So here's what happened. These women would be taken to the king once their beauty regimen was up. The king would kind of look them over, and then they would go off to another place to be sort of exiled into this harem of women, but not necessarily made the queen. When Esther was brought before the king, any woman going before the king was allowed to take with them whatever they wanted from the treasury, if you will, of beauty supplies, jewels and jewelry and clothing to make themselves appear glamorous or beautiful. But Esther chose not to take those things. She just went as she was. And she was so beautiful just as she was. She didn't have to ordinate herself. She didn't have to put on all of these jewels and stuff. She just went as she was. And the king was very, very pleased with her. And so he chose her. He picked Esther. He put a crown upon her head. And he not only put a crown upon her head, but he had a feast made in her honor. It was like a party to celebrate that she was now his queen. Meanwhile, when the virgins were all gathered a second time, they were all together after the feast of Queen Esther. The king went ahead and released everybody from taxes for a while. It was a celebration. This was a celebration because he had this new queen. And now after these virgins are all gathered and kind of set apart from Esther, Mordecai, her cousin who had adopted her, some people think that Mordecai was her uncle, but Mordecai was actually her cousin. He had adopted her because her parents had died. She was an orphan, and her uncle would have been responsible for her. We can gather from all of this that her uncle had also passed away, and now Mordecai became responsible for her. He raised her, and he was like a father to her. He adopted her just as his own. She did anything that Mordecai told her to. She was a young virgin and took his instructions seriously. Mordecai is sitting outside of the gates. He's probably no doubt excited that his daughter, his adopted daughter, has now become queen of this realm. And he's sitting out there and he hears these two eunuchs who are very upset with the king. For whatever reason, they are angry at the king and they are plotting to kill him, to have him killed. Mordecai tells Esther, he says, hey, they're going to kill the king. She gets this message to the king. He looks into it, he investigates, and he finds out, you know what? They really were going to kill me. So he has them hanged. They are hung. So Queen Esther saves the king's life. And this is very important to the rest of the story. The story gets better and better as it goes along. We are going to go ahead and stop there. Several years ago, I watched a wonderful movie, and I think it was just called Queen Esther. It was a great movie. I think you can find it on one of the streaming channels, YouTube. I don't know. Look for it. But it was pretty accurate. Once we go through the story of it, it's funny because a lot of times they'll come out with movies and they take some poetic license and they insert things into the movie that are not actually in the Bible, or they exclude things that are. So it doesn't always stick real true to the story. So what I would suggest is, when we are done with this, it's not a very long story. When we are done with the story of Esther, go check out that movie. Find a movie on it, because there's a couple of good ones out there that really portray the story of Esther. Well, we're going to stop there for today. And when we come together the next time, we're going to read chapter 3 and possibly chapter 4, because chapter 3 is sort of short. So I hope you're learning something. I hope that you're enjoying this story. I look forward to us being together the next time. God bless you and have a great day.